The key message of my talk today, and that's really independent of where you are in your startup journey. And if you're still currently by yourself, already getting started, following your dream in a small team, if there's only one thing I hope that sticks with you out of this talk, it will be to understand how business critical it is to really think about and actively design growth right from the beginning of your startup journey. Disclaimer alert, I'm not going to talk too much about Netlight, so use the Q&A to talk and ask me all the questions about how we recruit at Netlight if you're interested. But I really thought about how can I keep it interesting for you and keep the context also relevant and for you in connection with being in a startup or thinking about engaging with a startup. I bet all of you have had already their share of remote meetings today, and on this beautiful, cold, snowy April Tuesday. So I will also stay away from a PowerPoint to get my points across. But I want to tell you a story. I want to tell you a story of a childhood friend of mine, a dear friend who got married actually throughout Corona and who has failed miserably with his startup. Now, with around 10 years of recruiting experience under my buckle, I want to share some key questions with you, some key questions I would have loved to ask him back then. So what I know now, he could have really used back then in the beginning of his journey. Some questions that could have made the difference and some questions that if he would have an answer for them, he might still be around with a startup. At least that's what I believe now. So let's start with that story. Since I did not ask him in advance if it's okay for me to tell a story, let's call my friend, let's call him Nick, because actually that's also one of his nicknames. He looks much like a German Santa Claus, like the Nikolaus. As a character, if you would describe his character, Nick, he's fun, he's creative, he's brave, and he's a bit crazy. But when he puts his mind on something, he sticks it, he pulls it through. So it was no surprise to us in the friend circles more than a decade ago that when he came up with this idea about a dating platform for seniors, he was all in. Back then, I was naive. I didn't think of the idea much. I didn't see the value of a dating platform focused on such a specific target group. But he went bananas. He went bananas with his idea. And so for 2 years, he grew a big beard. He went all caveman. I told you his nickname is Nikolaus. I think that's where it started. And he gave this idea all he had. He had some family money and some family investment and also some sort of a business angel to help him in his beginning. But in the end, it turned out a complete failure. And one big part and why it became a failure, and he will be the first to attest that today, was because he was unable to build a team, unable to connect people he tried to get on board to his vision. So to be honest, his idea never caught any real momentum. He had constant fluctuation problems. They stayed, I think the biggest time they were like around 5-6 people in a very rough setup, but he never caught any proper steam. The question is why. In short, I think his focus was much on fixing a problem, finding solutions. He just wanted to keep that pedal to the metal and work on building prototypes. So he neglected any thought on what it meant to build a team. And so that's a bit a story about Nick, an introduction about Nick. And I want to start with the first question I would ask Nick now or back then with what I know now. And the first question would be, Nick, do you know what industry you are in? Do you really know what industry you are in? Nick, he would blast up with like an answer, I'm sure, and he would straightforward say something like, I'm in the dating industry, or I'm in the service industry. However, I argued that Nick did not realize that you can actually be in different industries. See, we live in an agile world right now, right? I mean, that was already true back then, and it's more true right now. An agile world with agile products, with agile services, where it's much about continuous improvement and a never finished cycle of what your product, what your service actually looks like. So the question is not how good are you now, but how good and how fast are you in adapting? When the top CEOs in Silicon Valley repeat the message, it's all about the people, they know that they're in competition for the top talent out there. But Nick did not realize that, and he had a hard time to come to a grasp. That his idea was that him entering or kickstarting his startup with his idea, he was entering the talent market, the competition for great people. And it really did not depend if he was looking for that first colleague to come on board, or when they were already like 4 or 5 and were trying to actually scale the team. If he would have, he might have placed a higher focus on growth entirely. But he just wanted to keep the pedal to the metal. So the next important question I want to ask Nick is, why? Why do you actually want to grow? Because see, Nick is the kind of person, especially in the beginning of the startup, and when he got like this very great funding, also from family, but also from that business angel, he wanted to do everything by himself, and it was, of course, I mean that's what happened in a startup, and that's also what's the big charm always of being involved in a startup or in the startup environment, of having the chance to get involved with left and right. But it was, for him, it was more a case of not trusting anybody to be able to do it as good as he can do it. For others not to be as fast as he would be. So it was much about this kind of a bit arrogant on a feeling that as long as he does it, it's gonna be a success. It's gonna be high quality. There are many reasons why you need to grow, and there are quite obvious reasons why you need to grow. But often the most basic is because you cannot do it all by yourself. You need good people around you. You need to unleash the power, keep up to speed. And I know that sounds very obvious. And what I want to get to is like really whatever the reason is that you want to grow, you need to understand exactly why. And that's a lesson learned the hard way for Nick in that way. The third important question, and I think that's one of the most important one for me, is why would I want to join? Why would I want to join Nick? Why would I want to join your startup? Because in the end, he came around and he understood he could not do it all by himself. So Nick started looking for people, and he looked who could get the different tasks done. He needed someone to work on the back end of his platform, so he looked for a back end software engineer. He needed someone to help get new investors on board, do a bit of business development, so he looked to hire someone for sales. But he was only on the lookout purely driven by finding a solution for the different tasks. And so he still had like the high fluctuation in this team was kept going on. Because it was hard for people to figure out what is actually the vision of this team. What is this vision? What is the purpose of actually me, of what we are wanting to try to achieve? And Nick could not give an answer to that question. Like, why should I join? He could not connect the purpose or his dream to the purpose of the company and to the people instead. So instead of getting the most relevant people on board, those who could also be relevant in 5 years or in 6 years and 7 years down the road, he focused on getting the right competence on board. And don't get me wrong, I mean, that's totally okay. Competence is super important and the basis, but also it's just the starting point. Knowing your purpose puts you into a position to articulate your vision, your purpose, which then allows you to get the most relevant people on board, the most relevant soft skills on board. Because actually in the end, soft skills is actually crazy hard to nail them and find the right fit for your culture that you're building. Markets change, which triggers change in the hard skill needed to come up with agile solutions. And since careers are all about change and development, you need to get the people on board to be willing to change. but you will only be willing to change if you know what you work for, what you're in it for. Next question. What drives your recruiting strategy decision, Nick? And that's a very interesting question. And I'm pretty sure Nick would not have an answer to that one as well. In his understanding, it was enough to write a job description, just post it somewhere online, and the rest would take care of himself. He did not possess any framework or guidelines for his decision making when it comes to choosing the right recruitment strategy. He didn't even have an overview of all what pays into growth. He didn't have an understanding of employer branding, of marketing, of culture, of building a culture. No thought yet invested in how do I actually grow. And the answer here is really, really important. And again, it does not matter if it's only one person you want to get on board or if it's several. It is very important that you start in the beginning already to think of how can I actually grow? How will my energy that I can have only limited resources where should I invest it in order to fuel my growth? And what helps me with that question is to think of it like like a medallion with two sides on it. One side that impacts growth and how you can actually grow is, of course, finding new people and designing the experience for new people to get to know you, to get to know the organization. The other part of that medallion, if you switch it around, is to take ownership, to create an environment where people want to stay. An environment that becomes the magnet why people want to work with you in the first place. And so that's a very intertwined, a very yin-yang kind of relationship of building the culture that then again attracts actually people, or the right people, the relevant people to join your vision. Until this day, with everything that I do on a daily basis, being involved with fueling growth, NetLight's growth, until this day, I ask myself how much of my energy pays into one of those two different sides of the medallion. And it helps to prioritize. It helps to map my activities against each other, and gives me a more detailed or a better way also to measure my impact on growth. Last but not least, the fifth question that I think is really important that sticks out is, how do you actually design your recruitment, dear Nick? That's probably the most practical and pragmatic question, and probably the question we could spend days and days to talk. But I want to highlight two thoughts here now. Back to the story first. When Nick finally started to meet talents and started to try to interview talents, he had no clear structure at all. And he did not think about how people were getting to know his company. And even worse was that he became a totally different person when in communication with potential colleagues, because he had this weird understanding of what a boss should be and needs to be, and so it became a very unauthentic experience for the people that were actually interested to find out more about where he was heading with this idea. So he missed out on two important keys to successes to think about when it comes to designing your recruitment experience. The first is, recruitment is much about relationship building, and so the same success factors that you already know from your private life, what influences or builds successful relationship, also applies in the working world when you're thinking about building relationships with people you want to grow your business with. Remain authentic, build on trust. Think how you're going to communicate on a very real and honest and open level. Evaluate behavior, then rather to overanalyze, and maybe the answers are just part of the equation that will help you design a fruitful recruitment experience. The next key to success is keeping an agile approach. We've talked about that we are in the market with agile products, with agile services. So it's very important to just get started with recruitment and to think about how you want to design your relevant recruiting experience. Collect the data on the way. Use an Excel. Use a notepad, whatever it is, to just write down, evaluate, reflect, and improve on the way. I mean, and that will, it's so simple, it's so obvious, but that in itself will allow you to keep getting better, keep evolving, and keep making and designing the recruiting towards your needs and towards your unique situation. So I'm closing up. Let's sum it up. Why having answers to all the questions is important. Number one is for you to know, so that you can grow with the most value. Again, independent if it's only one extra person, or you want to have, you're already thinking about scaling your team in high numbers. And two, you need those answers to allow others to participate in your growth journey. It makes it that much easier. It makes it that much nicer if you allow, if you can build the vision with others together. So I hope I brought the point across what I believe and thinking about growth strategy right from the get-go has such a big business impact. Do not start too late to think about what culture you want to build, and start thinking long-term right in the beginning. So, and enough of me talking. It stays weird just looking at myself in the screen. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have, but also feel free to hit me up on LinkedIn, Instagram, wherever you want, your social media of choosing. Thank you.